The Midianites came like locusts. Year after year, they crossed into Israel with tents, livestock, and camels without number. They did not come to live peacefully in the land, they came to consume it. Fields that should have fed families were stripped bare. Grain disappeared before it could be stored. Sheep and oxen vanished from the hills. The sound of approaching camps was enough to send fear through entire villages. Israel learned to hide what little remained. Mothers pulled children inside before dust appeared on the horizon. Old men stood at the mouths of caves and listened for the low thunder of animals. Farmers watched the edges of their fields with the tired eyes of people who had stopped trusting harvest to become bread. The land still produced, but the people could not rejoice in it. Every green shoot carried a question. Every ripening head of grain felt like an invitation for Midian to return. Men carved shelters into mountains. Families fled into caves. The people of the Lord lived like fugitives inside the land he had given them. Their inheritance had not changed, but their obedience had. The land still belonged to the Lord, yet Israel had bowed beneath gods that could not speak, could not save, and could not keep covenant. The Lord sent a prophet before he sent a deliverer. The word reminded Israel of Egypt, of rescue, of the Lord who had brought them out of bondage and given them the land. He had told them not to fear the gods of the Amorites, but they had not obeyed his voice. That was the wound beneath the oppression. Midian was terrible, but Midian was not the deepest problem. Israel wanted relief from the enemy, while altars of compromise still stood among them. The Lord would answer their cry, but he would not pretend their bondage had no spiritual root. The prophet's word would have been hard to hear. It did not flatter their suffering. It did not let them call their pain meaningless or their fear innocent. The Lord was merciful enough to answer their cry, and holy enough to name their rebellion. In Ophrah, Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress. It was not where wheat belonged. Wheat was supposed to be threshed in the open where wind could separate grain from chaff, but open places could be seen. Open places could be raided. Open places were dangerous for a people who had learned to expect loss. So Gideon worked low inside the winepress, hidden beneath stone walls, striking the wheat quickly while dust clung to his arms and sweat gathered at his neck. Every sound outside pulled his attention. A bird moving in the brush, a distant voice, the shift of wind over the trees. Fear can make ordinary sounds feel like warning. The air in the winepress was close. Chaff caught in his throat. Stone held the heat of the day. His shoulders ached from the cramped rhythm of work that was never meant for such a place. Each blow against the wheat sounded too loud to him, as if the hills themselves might carry it to the ears of Midian. If Midian found the grain, it would disappear like everything else. Gideon struck the wheat again. Anger had buried itself beneath his fear over the years. Israel was supposed to belong to the Lord. Their fathers told stories of Egypt, the sea, the wilderness, and the God who delivered with a mighty hand. Those stories were not small stories. They were the kind that should have shaped a nation with courage. The Lord had humbled Pharaoh. The Lord had opened the sea. The Lord had fed his people where there was no field and led them where there was no road. Gideon had inherited the memory of wonders, but his daily life was governed by hiding. That is part of the ache of the winepress. The old testimonies were still true, but Gideon was living in the painful distance between what God had done and what Israel had become. But Gideon's generation knew caves, they knew empty fields, they knew the shame of hiding food from enemies in their own land. Then Gideon saw someone sitting beneath the terebinth. He had not heard footsteps. The stranger sat quietly watching him work. No panic, no hurry, no fear of Midian. Then the word came, steady and impossible. "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Gideon stared at him. The words did not fit the dust on his skin. They did not fit the hidden grain, the low walls, the years of looking over his shoulder. They sounded like a name from another man's life. Mighty, he was hiding in a winepress. Valor did not feel like this. The words sounded too large for the place where he stood. "The Lord is with you." Gideon looked at the hidden wheat, the stone walls, the dust on his hands, and the land that fear had hollowed out. If the Lord was with Israel, why did the people hide in caves? If the Lord was with them, why did Midian empty their fields? If the Lord was with them, why did the stories of deliverance feel like echoes from another age? Gideon gave voice to the question many in Israel had learned to carry silently. "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" The question came from pain. Gideon had heard of the wonders his fathers told. He knew the testimony of the Lord bringing Israel out of Egypt. But stories can feel distant when suffering is close. He did not speak like a man debating ideas. He spoke like a son of Israel standing amid the ruins of confidence. The old testimonies had not vanished from his memory, but they had become heavy with ache. If the Lord had done such things before, why did his people now whisper in caves and hide grain under stone? The Lord did not answer Gideon with a long explanation. He answered him with a calling. Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? Gideon looked down at his hands, dust, wheat, fear. This was the might the Lord was speaking to? Gideon's answer came quickly, as if weakness had been waiting for its chance to speak. His clan was the weakest in Manasseh. He was the least in his father's house. He knew where he came from. He knew his family's standing. He knew his own fear. But the Lord was not asking Gideon to measure himself by himself. The call did not rest on Gideon's confidence. It did not wait for him to become impressive. The authority was not in Gideon's name, his family, his courage, or his history. The authority was in the one who sent him. But I will be with you. The promise was not that Gideon was enough. The promise was that the Lord would be with him. Gideon still struggled to understand what was happening. Part of him feared believing too quickly. Another part feared what it would mean if the Lord truly had come near. A man can grow familiar with oppression until freedom begins to feel dangerous. If the Lord had truly come, then hiding could not remain Gideon's whole life. If the Lord had truly spoken, then the winepress was not only a shelter, it was also the place where obedience would begin to pull him out. So Gideon asked for a sign. He prepared an offering, a young goat, unleavened cakes, and broth. His hands moved quickly, but his thoughts did not settle. Who was this man beneath the tree? Why had he spoken as though the future had already been decided? Why did the words "mighty man of valor" still trouble him more than comfort him? The work of preparation steadied him only a little. The smell of cooked meat rose from the house. Warm bread rested in his hands. Broth moved inside the pot as he walked back toward the terebinth. Ordinary things became weighty because the presence waiting beneath the tree was not ordinary. Gideon returned and placed the meat and unleavened cakes on the rock. He poured out the broth as he was told. Then the tip of the staff touched the offering. Fire burst from the rock. The flame consumed the meat and the cakes in an instant. Gideon stepped back, breath caught in his chest. The stranger was gone. The winepress, the tree, the rock, the dust, the silence, everything suddenly felt different. The place of hiding had become a place of holy fear. The stone that had received the offering still seemed to hold the memory of flame. The air felt emptied and filled at the same time, as if heaven had opened for a breath and closed again, leaving Gideon standing under the weight of what he had seen. Gideon knew he had seen the angel of the Lord face to face, and terror took hold of him. But the Lord answered Gideon's fear with peace. Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die. So Gideon built an altar there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." It was a strange name to build in a land ruled by fear. Midian was still in the land. The fields were not restored. The enemy had not vanished, but the Lord had spoken peace before the battle began. That same night, the Lord gave Gideon his first command, not against Midian, against the false altar in his own father's house. Gideon may have expected the call of God to begin with battle. Instead, it began at home. The altar of Baal had to come down. The Asherah beside it had to be cut down. The Lord's altar had to be built in its place. Beneath the cover of night, Gideon gathered 10 men from his servants and moved toward the altar. The moonlight stretched across the stones. Every sound felt too loud. Wood cracked, stone shifted. The Asherah came down. Gideon's hands were not steady, but they were obedient. This was not the courage of a man who felt nothing. This was the obedience of a man who feared the Lord more than he feared the town waking around him. Every scrape of stone could have summoned accusation. Every crack of wood could have brought death to his door by morning. He built an altar to the Lord in the stronghold and offered the bull, using the wood of the Asherah he had cut down. The night hid his fear, but it could not hide his obedience from the Lord. Morning came with outrage. The men of the city gathered around the broken altar, anger rising through the crowd as they demanded to know who had done it. When they discovered it was Gideon, they came to his father's house with death in their voices. "Bring out your son, that he may die." The same men who had suffered under Midian now defended the idol that could not save them. But Joash, Gideon's father, answered with unexpected clarity. Would they contend for Baal? Would they save him? If Baal was a god, let him contend for himself. The crowd had come ready to accuse Gideon. Instead, Baal was put on trial. The silence after Joash spoke must have been strange. Men who had shouted for Gideon's death now stood before the broken evidence of their own fear. The altar could not answer. The idol could not rise. Baal had been defended by men because Baal could not defend himself. The broken altar remained in the morning light. Gideon was still afraid, but obedience had begun to make fear smaller. Then Midian came again. The Amalekites and the people of the east crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. The old fear returned quickly through Israel, but something had changed in Gideon. The Lord had spoken to him. The altar of Baal had fallen. The people had begun to see that false gods could not defend themselves. Then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon. The phrase carries weight. The Spirit did not merely stir a feeling in him. The Lord clothed him for the work he could not carry naked in his own strength. Courage came to him as covering, not as something he manufactured from the remains of his fear. The fearful man lifted a trumpet to his mouth. The sound cut through the air. It carried over ground that had known too much silence. It moved across the places where men had lowered their eyes and counted what Midian had taken. It called not from human confidence, but from the strange authority of the Lord resting on a trembling man. Men began to gather behind him. Abiezer followed. Messengers went throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. The man who had hidden grain from Midian now called Israel to face Midian. Fear had not vanished, but something stronger had come upon him. Gideon still stood beneath the weight of a calling he had not asked for. The valley ahead held armies. The people behind him carried fear. Inside Gideon, questions still moved like shadows, but the Lord had spoken before Gideon felt ready. Mighty man of valor. Those words had found him in hiding, covered in dust, threshing wheat where no one should have been threshing wheat. The story was not finished. Midian still waited in the valley. Gideon still had more to learn about weakness, fear, and the strange strength of God. But the man in the winepress was no longer alone. The Lord had entered the hidden place. He had named the fear, challenged the idols, answered with peace, and covered Gideon with his spirit. The valley still waited, but the story had already changed because God had drawn near to him there personally.